How do you change the proportions of the oval?
How do I change the proportion of the oval? Inside here, I don't know if we can show it. It's on a slide on the inside, and there's 3 bolts that hold this slide. And you can move this slide and you can turn it from round out to what's called 30 offset, which would be 4 5/8 inches longer than wide. And then you just tighten those. So I've got it tightened right now at 25, but there's a cross slide in here that you move. And that's what changes the oval. If it wasn't quite such a big group, I'd turn it on and have you come up and see how the inside works, but it's kind of a big group. So now we're going to go back over to my round lathe. We're going to take the inside out. I don't have a round lathe here. We're going to turn it all the hard way. And we have to set it. We have to set it at, set the chuck. Set the chuck at 9 o'clock. And here's my master line. Get it 12 to 6. And then I'll make some adjustments. Now I can also adjust the tool rest. So now when we're going to be able to see where 9 o'clock is, and I will adjust the tool rest height to match 9 o'clock. So we're going to be on this camera. So just turn it on. 9 o'clock. If you can see the shadow, 9 o'clock is right there. Above it's a shadow, below it's a shadow, but there's actually, if you were up here close, you could see the X. So what I want to do is just take my gouge. And the tool rest is a little bit high. I'm going to lower the tool rest. I'm just going to lower the tool rest a little bit. Much, just a little bit, so that the point of my tool is touching right at 9 o'clock. And now I'm matching. I'm cutting right at 9 o'clock. I would go over to the round lathe. I would take everything out round that I could. I'd leave my tenon in the middle if I was roughing it out. If I was finished turning, at this point I would take on the round lathe, I would take that center tenon out, all right? But here I'm just going to take it out on the oval lathe. So this is going to be a real thrilling demo. All right, normally on a bowl I would start hollowing out in the middle, all right? I actually need to start hollowing out here on the outside, working my way into the middle. Going back to the 5/8, and I'm going to leave about inch and 1/8 wall thickness. Now, remember what I told you, and remember that drawing of how the wood is starting to go straight up and down at center? So I can actually check now and see if I'm cutting at 9 o'clock. My band will be equal all the way around if I'm cutting at 9 o'clock. Just for fun, so right now it's even. I've got lots of wood here. I'll show you what happens if I want to. I'm going to raise the tool rest up here a bunch, all right? I'm not going to cut at 9 o'clock here for a minute because I got lots of wood. So what has happened now, if you look at this, I got 2 shallow spots and 2 thick spots. So I'm not cutting, my inside oval is different than my outside oval. Now you could have some artistic issues there that could be kind of fun, but I can tell you it doesn't really work. So we're going to go back down. I've got my pipe clamp on my tool rest. We're going to go back down to 9 o'clock. Okay. Yes? Yeah. If I didn't have it balanced, you would probably go through the wall on the thin corners, would be my guess. I mean, you could leave it thick enough, but it would be really. And I've actually thought about changing the oval as I go down. You know, kind of step. Yeah. Go for it. But you can see the advantages of turning wet wood. It's just so much nicer. Like I said, when I first started, I just turned dry wood. Man, that's no excuse to rough out dry wood. Now I also can come in and cut this way. So what's happening right now is I have an interrupted cut because I'm cutting into where I had my, so I have wood, no wood, wood, no wood. So it's a little bit hard to cut. The other thing I would say about oval chucks and turning oval is never put your hand past the tool rest. That's just a safety issue. And again, let's get the pencil back out here. There's the wood movement at center. It's straight up and down. And so you can't actually go a bevel cut riding the bevel in there. You can't do it. There's a point where your gouge will just quit cutting if you're cutting like you would on a bowl. That's why I had to flip it over and just kind of shear scrape it out. Because there's a point at which your gouge just will quit working on the center of these ovals. So a letter comes into the local post office addressed to God. Postmaster opens it up. Letter's from a little old lady, and she says, Lord, it's getting to the end of the month, and I'm out of money, and I'm really hurting. She says, you know, $100 would get me to the end of the month. I really would appreciate it. Postmaster scuffles around the post office, manages to collect $96. Puts it in an envelope, has one of his people deliver it to the little old lady. I'm going to interrupt my story for a minute. I'm starting now to make cuts perpendicular to the face of the chuck, and that's really hard. Parallel cuts are easy, perpendicular cuts are hard. So anyway, so he has his guy deliver the letter to the little old lady. A couple weeks later, another letter comes into the post office addressed to God. So the postmaster opens it. And it's from the lady, and she says, Lord, thank you for the $100. Thank you for the money. It really helped me out. I really needed it. I just wanted to tell you that those thieves at the post office stole $4 out of your letter. So you can see right here at center, I'm having to turn and scrape it out. You can't bevel cut it out right there at the center. And now, see how my tool is bouncing around? I'm kind of On the wall here, I'm trying to ride the bevel. You can't ride the bevel. You have to be just off the bevel. If you try to ride the bevel, you'll get a hellacious bounce. Now, down here on the bottom, I'm going back parallel to the face of the chuck, and I can kind of ride the bevel. And then somewhere right in here, it'll quit cutting. So the wood's going straight up and down right there. So even though this is not going to be a finished oval, I'll take it down. I'm going to take it down close to finished thickness, just to show you. Everybody knows what fulcrum is, right? So I want to keep my tool rest as close as I can. If you have the tool rest right here, you have all the control. If you have your tool clear over the tool rest this far, the wood has all the control. So I'm just going to move my tool rest a little bit. And I have my pipe clamp, so I'm not changing the height. All right. And I'm going to, I might be getting in the way of this camera. We may have to. Perpendicular to the face of the chuck. The next thing is the lesson I learned from Wally Dickerman. How many people in here knew Wally? What a wonderful guy. He died last year at 94, was turning right up to the end. I actually took his last piece off the lathe after he was dead, and I finished it, and it's going to be in the AEW auction this year. All I had to do was finish the bottom and a little bit. We took his pieces. He was working on some different pieces. We passed out some of them to his friends up in Seattle, and some went to his friends in Portland. A couple of them went to Paul Fennell down in Arizona. They're all going to be finished and donated back to AEW. Wally was number 164, I think, member of AEW. He was one of the original members of AEW. Okay, so the wall thickness, I'm going to leave it. You can see it's really bouncing my tool. This is not actually too bad. On dry wood, it'll be worse. But anyway, what I learned from Wally was finish that first inch up around the rim and then go do the rest of the bowl, because when you get down to the bottom, even on a dry bowl, the rim will have moved a little bit out around because you've changed the stress in the piece of the wood. I'm just going to check my wall thickness here a little bit. Again, this is not finished turning. This is just showing you the technique. Okay. But you can see now, if this had been a dry blank like the walnut piece I sent around, I would have turned that center part out. This would be much easier by turning this center part out on a round lathe, and I wouldn't have to fight this quite so much in the finish. You can actually, for taking the wood out. Okay, good question. Question about Carbide Tools. So in that case, you're going to be scraping. You have a trade-off to make. There's a lot of trade-offs in this. So when I went to buy the chuck, I bought this from Christian down at Woodworkers Emporium. He wanted to sell me a captured bar system, which would cut right at 9 o'clock. But they're all carbide or those types of tools where they're scraping the wood out. The problem, the good thing is, with using captured bar and carbide tools, is your oval would be perfectly oval shaped because you're always cutting at 9 o'clock. The downside to scraping is that you would have hellacious tear out on the end grain, which would be incredibly difficult to sand out. So while the shape would be right, your tear out on the end grain would be horrendous. And by using the gouge, I get clean cuts on the end grain, but I end up with some ridges. But the ridges are okay because I can power sand them out. What I don't want to deal with is tear out on the end grain, which is really hard to get out because it'd be really deep tear out using carbide and scrapers. So,
have you tried any carving options, die grinders and a burr, or chainsaw blade and a 4.5 inch grinder?
Couple of good questions here. What about the thought would be to mount on a tool rest with to hold like a grinder and run it in. I have thought about that if I was commercially producing ovals.